Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to all of our viewers and listeners. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to my guest and younger brother, Ahmad Jafari. How are you?
Assalam, rahmatullah. Alhamdulillah. Hafiz Asad, how are you, man?
Alhamdulillah, I'm good. I'm good. So, Mufti Ahmad is no guest to me. He's no stranger to me. I've known him at this point in time for more than half his life, as a lot of the guests I brought on I have. It's almost a year since the day his brother was on, and Alhamdulillah, Mufti Saab is kindly given his time to discuss a very important topic. Challenges of being an imam in the West,
A
and
topic that can get me in trouble too.
yeah, it's a topic that it can get him in trouble. But I mean, imamat is it's such an important position as far as community leadership goes. But at the same time, a lot of people don't understand the intricacies and the delicate nature of it. Everybody wants to be the imam. They want to be able to talk with everybody, but they don't realize the benefit and the damage that you can bring to a community by means of your tongue. And it goes back to the hadith where Prophet ﷺ repeatedly reminds us throughout the course of his life to guard our tongues. One of the many things. And what's it called? So being an imam isn't just standing in front of people and commanding them and leading them and everybody just follows you, but there's a lot that goes into it. And Mufti Saab is no stranger to being an imam. He's been an imam in a few different masajid in a few different states, I think, at this point in time. And he's given his time. He's still fairly young, but a lot of times when we get put into these imamate positions, we get put in at a very young age, and we get thrown right into the fire. And I've done imamat on and off for about 13 or so years. I think Mufti Saab's done it for a good bit of time. His brother's currently an imam, his twin. So, Mufti Saab, how are you doing today?
Today I am doing well, alhamdulillah, although I've been doing a lot of driving today.
Okay,
Probably,
alhamdulillah.
yeah, easily past 100 miles for today.
Mm,
But alhamdulillah, hanging in there.
alhamdulillah, hanging in there. So, I want to get into the topic. I don't want to waste any time, no fillers, nothing like that. Why do we need to discuss this topic, and what's at stake in communities if we don't pay attention to this topic?
So first and foremost, Jazakallah khair for having this topic. Anything I say does not reflect my current situation. It can be of my experiences, maybe, maybe not. It's not to point out the or expose any one community in specific. It's just to get the idea out there of the different challenges that imams face. What we say here today is probably not going to even cover half of it, but there are much more. We're just touching the surface, and that would still be barely. So, why this topic needs to be discussed and what's at stake for the community. And this is something that, I've given quite a bit of thought on this matter in terms of what's at stake. Because what happens is like when challenges and when things aren't going in the way that they're supposed to be, they were promised as an imam, and you have other opportunities that come up, the first chance you will get to leave that position of being an imam, you will take it. And that is simply because things weren't done the right way. And that's why I feel it's so important. And what happens if we don't talk about this and we don't make a change about this is the fact that people who are qualified and the competent individuals, they are going to leave these positions. And the harm of that will not be for the uncles and for the aunties that, alhamdulillah, for the most part, they've gotten their part of deen, but it will be for the next generation. And then we ask ourselves, what happened to the youth, right? Why are there no youth in the masjid? And that's really the reason is because you gave such a difficult time to the competent born and raised here in the West, in America, right? Knows the culture, knows the society. But these individuals that are the new imams that are coming up from the newer generation, they have other opportunities, right? They're not the typical ones that you can just bring import from back home, and that's it. They're stuck on the management, and the management says jump, they ask how high. That doesn't work anymore, right? I'm sorry to be so blunt about it, but that's the reality of the matter. And that's why when these imams, when they've had enough, they're going to leave the positions. And why is that a very bad thing? It's because when the competent ones leave, the incompetent ones will come and take their place. And that is, we're playing with our deen at that point.
And you see a lot of younger guys now, alims, hufaz, qurra, they're not even taking imamat positions because they just don't want the stress. They don't want the basically the mental and physical beatdowns of having to basically take care of their responsibilities and continue to be asked for more. And going back to your point talking about importing people, it used to be back in the day, we didn't have any homegrown imams, any homegrown ulama. Now we have mashallah madaris and different institutes and stuff like that of knowledge. And now bringing somebody from overseas, even before, it was a culture clash where the younger kids, they didn't like, even us, we had qari sab, a lot of people, like even yourself, you're like, I wasn't at that time, I wasn't able to build that connection because of the culture gap, language, things like this. But now we've come to the realization we can't continue importing people from overseas because it doesn't work. And
And
there may be some benefit, I'm not saying there's no benefit, but overall the society and the community doesn't benefit as much.
yeah, and just to kind of clarify, we're not asking, or I'm not saying, and you kind of mentioned there is benefit in bringing ulama scholars from overseas, and I'm not saying to take them out of their positions. No, because the work they do and the mindset and the wisdom they bring for the younger guys, we need that wisdom, right?
Yeah.
The younger ulama, the younger imams need that wisdom from them. So they are essential to the community as well, very essential, because at the end of the day, there are still going to be adults, there are still going to be the old school type of individuals who need that being catered to them as well. At the
Mhm.
same time, we should not neglect the next generation in terms of what they need and how their deen and iman will be protected, and that's through someone they can relate to, some younger ulama, imams, and whatnot.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. So what's it called? Like, like you mentioned, what's at stake? The very, structure and fabric of our Muslim societies and communities is at stake if we don't take care of this. So usually what happens in communities and societies, this is jumping to a different question, is usually when something goes wrong in a masjid, maybe people aren't coming, there's a lack of classes, basically anything and everything, youth programs, um always the first person blamed is the imam. Oh, Imam Sab, you're not doing enough. Or Sheikh, you're not doing enough. You need to do more. What are we not giving our imams and ulama as resources? Like, obviously, you need resources. You need funds. You need time. You need management's time. What are we not giving them? Why are they not able to fully perform?
So this is a good point to talk about, because there's one masjid. Again, I'm not going to take any names of any particular masjids, but because I don't endorse anyone specifically, and I don't want to take it out of context. But what we need to set up our imams for success, right? Give them the support, and when we say support, we're not only talking about financially supporting the programs that are being done, right? We need people to give their time and helping these imams become who they are, and take that, allow the imams to be leaders, allow the imams to be leaders, because at the end of the day, nowadays, and we're going to touch up on this later as well, but the responsibilities that they are given is not, it's not practical at all. It's not practical at all. You want the imam to literally have every responsibility you can think of, from leading salah to making sure he is locking the door after Isha salah. Right? That's not ideal, and that's not practical. Right? We don't want and we don't need that, because then we take away from what the imam could actually be using his time for example, halaqas and whatnot. Right? So we give imams that go ahead, and for example, I'll give an example. There's, if an imam is doing a family night and whatnot, right? Now, should it be the imam's responsibility to make sure about the logistics, how everything will go? It should not be the imam's responsibility. The guidance should come from the imam. For the committee that is assigned for this event, they should definitely take guidance from the imam, because the imam is a'lamun nas in that community. He will be the most knowledgeable in terms of deen and how to make sure deen is taken care of in this event. So they take guidance from the imam, but the imam needs to be concentrated on his own speech, on his own halaqah to prepare for that, to make sure that is successful and efficient. But now, if we have the imam figuring out the food situation, how many people to expect, and all of this, it takes away from what the imam was actually meant to do.
I see. So what's it called? Just you can't be burdening the imam with not only setting up the program, but basically going from A to Z. You have to have a team, and this is where management comes in. A lot of times, is management's like, okay, Imam Sahib, what is the program we need to do? Let's make it a success. Imam Sahib says, okay, we need nihari, we need this and that, and then Imam Sahib says, okay, also for the kids we need pizza. So it shouldn't be the imam's job to call for pizza, make sure it's there, and then also making sure Nihari's there, things like that. And then also giving the halak, and right after halakha, making sure that the trays are open for food. I mean, it should be, people should take responsibility because, like, we've discussed a few times already in these first 10, 11 minutes, our fabric of society, our youth, they are at stake. I know we like to make slogans like we love the youth at the masjid and stuff like that. But realistically, if we're not supporting the imam, we're not supporting the youth.
And
And
I think, go ahead. Sorry,
no,
I
no,
didn't
go
mean
ahead, go ahead.
like involvement from the community and another aspect of it, right? Like these programs that there are so many programs that can be held at the masjid, and the imams are never against the programs, right? The
Mhm.
one thing that we need to make sure is when we do these programs, we keep the imam in loop and we take guidance from the imams. That imam, this is my suggestion of a program. What do you suggest? Is it okay if we do this program? Once the imam gives a green light, tell us what are things that we need to take into consideration to make sure that Islamically we are doing everything right and we are not crossing any boundaries, right?
Mm.
They take the initiative. The community's involvement is absolutely essential. And that comes to another point as well, right? The power struggle in management and whatnot, and how much they are allowing the community to really feel involved. And then when the community doesn't feel involved into a project, they're not going to get donations.
Yeah.
They're not going to give donations. Why? Because, hey, I want to give my donations where my voice is heard. If it's my masjid, my local masjid, I am giving, right? I want to make sure my needs are catered towards. But if I'm giving so much for a masjid that really doesn't even hear what I am saying, then that obviously, for anyone who is donating, it obviously raises a question mark like, is this the place that I really should be spending and investing my time and money in?
That's very true. I mean, a lot of times the masajid are like, donations are not coming in. Imam Sahib, you're not doing the program right. No, you're not putting in the right resources to make sure the program's a success. It's not just, you can never say it's one person's fault. It's never. It's a collective effort. Now, on the flip side, I know I told you this is a question I will ask. In certain communities, it happens that, look, not all imams are the same, not all imams are built the same. In certain communities, you'll see the imams, sometimes they'll have a lot more control over the masjid, but they become lackadaisical. They don't fulfill their responsibilities a lot of times. Now, what is some advice? How can a masjid board get the most out of their imam? Because this is something a lot of times masjid boards don't know how to get it right, and the imam may not be properly utilized, or he may just not want to do anything.
Fair enough. And that's a good point, because I'm not saying there should be no accountability. At the end of the day, the imam is hired with a responsibility, hopefully a realistic responsibility, and they should have, in terms of what happened if such and such events are not taken care of, what will be the consequence of that. And these things need to, and I think accountability is absolutely essential to all of this. Because if there's no accountability, at the end of the day, the money that comes to the masjid is not one individual's property. It's the community's masjid. And if we are not utilizing it and we hire an imam, someone we know, to go ahead and lead the prayers whenever he's available, and when he's not available, oh, too bad, right? And we don't deduct anything and there's no consequence for that, we are questionable to Allah, right? We're going to answer to Allah that you gave the community's money to this individual. Was this person even fulfilling that responsibility for which he was hired, or is it not? So I think being the reason why a lot of masajid come into a problem with this is because it's never set out what the consequences are, right? It's as they come, we'll deal with it. That's a very bad way to approach anything, because if you don't have that set out in the beginning, then later there are going to be hearts are going to be broken, and that can't work. And generally, it will always be the imam at whose heart will be broken because he has no control in that situation.
Mm. That's true. That's true. Okay, so a few months ago, what's it called? I had a chat with the sheikh, and we were talking about mental health, and we were talking about continuing education. So imams are rarely provided funds for or grants or any sort of scholarships from the masjid to pursue continuing education or any sort of specializations which are needed from the community to improve the community, to get some skills for the community. In comparison, I have chats with pastors. I haven't had many chats with rabbis, but even rabbis, they're given these funds and grants to get these skills that are needed to help out in community development. Like, for example, some sort of a marriage course to help out, married couples. A lot of times, ulama, even pastors and rabbis, they through the schooling, they don't get the real experience. So when you start getting the real experience, you go to some sort of a course and you enhance your skills, taking into account the experience. A lot of times our imams aren't given these sorts of grant scholarships or even time to pursue continuing education. And obviously that falls back on the community, that how important it is. And how important do you feel it is that we should spend some money from our communities to help our imams gain continuing education and improve their skills?
I mean, if you want an imam to be successful and efficient, and you want the community to move forward, you absolutely need to have this. In every field, everything is always in a constant change. The moment you stop and you're sitting stagnant, you're not moving forward. The community is not progressing. And that in it of itself, like, it's self-explanatory how you're not moving anywhere. The community is in the same state it was, if not worse, 10 years ago. It's the same right now. Why? Because there was no growth in the community, and the growth starts from the top, right? But the thing is, imams don't have time to take these courses. They barely have time for their families. Where are they going to give time to go out and take these courses? That will be like a vacation, considered a vacation time for them, right? And another issue, right? We're not investing enough time into our imams, and we expect our imams to be marriage counselors, mental health counselors, family matters. They take on all these cases, yet they're expected to take on all these cases. But in reality, like, what did you actually do to prepare the imam for that position?
Yeah, I mean, these things, they don't come naturally. Like, you started off as an imam when you were like 18 or 19, if I'm not mistaken, and you weren't married. You obviously, marriage unto itself is an experience, and you learn a lot from it. And then if you take a course and you take it all into account, you'd be like, oh, okay, I learned a lot more. But if we're not preparing our imams and then we're expecting more out of them, it's an unrealistic expectation. And a lot of times imams are treated like second class citizens. When it comes to salaries, they're on the lower end of the economic scale. Or if they ask for a raise, somebody may ask in the community or the board, are you doing this for Allah? Or are you doing this to become rich? Whereas the people, whenever they get a job, their demands are, we want benefits, we want insurance, we want 401k, we want IRA, Roth IRA, and all of these things. And like you mentioned before, that the imams, sometimes they have to take on second jobs or take on like paid gigs, like teaching kids at their houses and stuff like that, just to make ends meet. And I'm not saying all imams, alhamdulillah, some imams do well, but a majority of the imams don't do that well, and a lot of people don't realize that. And even like, I've spent time in Pakistan, madrasa teachers and imams, they barely make anything. But in America, maybe the situation may be a slight bit better, but in a lot of smaller communities or even bigger communities, it's not that much better.
You're absolutely right in that aspect. And it puts the imams in a very difficult situation when they have to take up other jobs. Why? Because it takes away the time that they can be investing in bettering and empowering the community, right? For a time where the imam could be preparing a program for the community, he now has to take that time and spend it towards the making that money just to make sure he gets what he needs to put food on the table. And this is a very big problem because at the end of the day, the community is the one that is going to be at loss, because all of these things affect the imam's ability to perform at a high level. And people don't realize that to prepare a lecture, to prepare a halaqah, to prepare these things, it takes time. It's not that an imam can just come up. Very few can actually or have that capability where you can just put them on the spot every week, every other day, and they'll be able to give you a solid lecture. That's not how the norm is, right? And it's important to understand that these things take a lot of time. For example, one imam, he was requested to do a tafsir halaqah. So the imam was requested, he was doing a part-time gig, and he was requested that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 5 days a week, he will do a 45-minute tafsir halaqah. Of course, there are many problems with this, but one of the main problems, like even let's just say there was a very enthusiastic community that really wanted tafsir every single day and they were ready for that tafsir class, right? How long do you think it takes to prepare a 45-minute tafsir halaqah? This is intense stuff, like, and you can't just mix things up in tafsir. It's the
You
word of
can't do
Allah.
that. This is what I feel like the Quran is saying.
Yeah, you can't do that. And you can't just then start asking the community, hey guys, what do you think this verse of the Quran means? No, this is not the community reading time. This is tafsir is a very serious matter. And of course, the other problem is you're not going to get people, and well, it's
Yeah.
not common to get people who are going to sit for tafsir every single day with consistency and not have anything come up. So these types of things really take away from the imam's ability to perform at a high level. The Jum'ah khutbahs will not be as effective as they can be if the imam was given that paid so well where he can now concentrate on just making sure he is fulfilling his responsibility properly, right? And that's very important. And again, the community development, the community is the one that suffers the most,
Mm.
absolutely the most. And if it's not the elderly, then it will definitely be the younger generation. And that's why we can see their absence from the masjid.
Yeah, absolutely. Always by saying salam to you. Um, but what's it called? Yeah, no, we're seeing the effects on the youth. And like I was talking with somebody the other day, I'm like, alhamdulillah, I consider myself very lucky that I go to the masjid as often as I do.
Mm.
I know a majority of the guys who I grew up with who are my age, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give me hidayah and continue to take me. That, maybe we didn't have an imam back then. Growing up in small town America, a lot of places didn't have imams, and we didn't have an imam here, so people weren't able to build that connection with the imam, with the masjid and stuff like that. So when I came back from madrasa, I made sure to try to give the kids that experience so that they can come to the masjid and stay at the masjid, and we have basketball, pizza, things like that. And so alhamdulillah, those kids, they, it was sort of like a token that stayed there, and now they, alhamdulillah, they still come. And we need to give them those experiences that Islam. And inshallah, next week I have a podcast episode with Sheikh Zahib from Edmonton, and we're going to be talking about everything in deen, everything isn't haram. There's a lot of halal fun you can have. So we need to be giving those experiences, and our imams need to be given those tools to be able to give those halal experiences. And a lot of times they're not.
You're absolutely right. And that's as I said in the beginning, like we need to set up our imams for success and not failure,
Yeah.
right?
So the next thing is boards. This is a topic that we could go on for weeks and weeks. Because always love the masjid shuras, and the masjid boards and the board of trustees and the finance department and stuff like that. Dealing with them is often backbreaking. They make demands. They often demand the imam be available 24/7. Not 24/7 literally, but like figuratively speaking. Roles are not defined, like you said earlier. Expectations are really high. You got to lead 5 times a day. You got to give daily madrasa maktab classes for 2 hours. You have to have office hours. When does it get inhumane? Obviously guys have to have times for their families. They have to have personal time. Imams are also human. They're not some machines. And whereas I remember back in the day when imams would come from overseas, they would work extra hard to impress the community or the board members so that they would get paid adequately, not not get whatever's the leftovers for the masjid, or they say, oh, this month we don't have any money to pay you. And I'll give you an example. I have a good friend, he's an alim, he was in South Florida, and he was telling me the story about a guy and how less they used to pay him, that they were basically paying him, like they gave him a house and they were basically paying him like $800 to $1,000 a month, and that was it. And this guy barely had any money to buy groceries. If his kid got sick, he had a hard time taking them to the doctor's office, and he was really angry. He's like, this is your imam, you guys are treating him like dirt. So it's the responsibility of the board to give some izzat to the guy who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to bestow this knowledge with. Like, what's wrong? Why are people doing this? Like, once you get on a board, why are you like this?
And I, you know, as you said, when does it become inhumane? I think it's inhumane from the moment it starts. The like, well, I remember one of my friends, he was who is an imam, a very good imam, mashallah. When he was negotiating the contract and the terms, they were asking that weekends are the time that you need to be at the masjid. So he's like, okay, you have to understand that I'm a human as well, and I have a family as well. The things that you can do on you do on weekends, I like to do, and on weekends as well. I like to take my kids to the park. I like to spend time with the family. Weekdays we generally can't do that because of our schedules. So you need to be understanding. At least give some time here and there for the imam to take weekends off, so that the imam can have time to himself and then the family. And what happens worse, and people are now starting to finally catch on, right? For the people who sometimes go over in regards to what you can classify as, on quotations, serving the deen or doing the work of deen, right? They sometimes overdo it, and it comes at the cost of their own families, right? They
Hmm.
invest so much time, whether it be for the masjid, whether it be for a different organization, for whatever sake it may be, right? For whether it be for dawah, right? They sometimes sacrifice so much time, and in this process, they compromise their own family. And at the end of the day, imams, like, we know better than everyone else, right? The imams know that we are going to be questioned about our families first. That how did you raise your family? And unfortunately, a lot of imams are in a very tough situation. I was just having a conversation with an imam the other day, and he was like, yeah, I'm really starting to think about, like, my kids are growing up. I need to start figuring out, because the way it stands right now, I can't give any time to my family. I can't give any time to my children. And before it's too late, it's the kids are going to grow up. They're going to grow up in whatever way society has done, influence them, and he will have zero influence on their lives. And then when it comes to making decisions, there's nothing, right? They won't do what we were hoping they would do, right? In terms of making sure they're within Sharia, in the bounds of Sharia. So I
Yeah.
think that's important. And inshallah, things become easier for the imams to give, to be given adequate responsibility along with pay, so that they can really, they're not put in a position where they have to sacrifice their family for the sake of the community.
Yeah. And especially for the guys who came from overseas, they couldn't speak English, they didn't have any other skill set. So I really feel for those guys, because I've met them and seen them, and even I've spent time overseas, and you see the struggle, and you see that especially living in America, they can't find to do anything else, so they're at the mercy of the board. And
And that's why they'll take all the nonsense, right? But and as I was saying before, like, the ones who are born and raised here, they don't need to keep with the nonsense, right? They can get
yeah,
up and leave and no problem, right?
yeah.
So, and I'm just saying, like, when push comes to shove and they get an opportunity to leave, even the ones that didn't have a choice before, but the moment they get an opportunity, the boards really need to ask themselves, do you think he would stay if he had an opportunity to leave? Because if
Mhm.
you have an imam who would leave had he had the opportunity, then you need to ask, what are you doing wrong? Because you're obviously not doing anything right.
Yeah. Mashallah, we have a guy. I think I've met him before, saying Mashallah. His name's Muhammad Jafari. Uh,
A lot of people say he looks like me.
apparently he does. But I've even heard stories, and not taking specifics, where they've held up green card paperwork to blackmail imams,
No,
and
it gets worse.
it gets worse. There is much worse than this. But on a lighter note for the listeners and viewers, that things like this have happened, and to the people who are on boards, um this is a reminder, not any sort of warning. This is a reminder. Remember, you also have to pass away, and you also have to answer Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you kept your imam in a bad situation, where if his kids were sick and he couldn't take him to a doctor's office, or if you held him hostage on a green card situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to ask you. And how are you going to answer this question? Today you might say, oh well, he didn't do this right and that right. On the day of resurrection, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to ask you in the most just of courts, and those excuses aren't going to work.
Absolutely.
So what's it called? Yeah, it's just sometimes you hear some situations. It's just, man, it's heartbreaking.
And you
Um,
know, as you were saying, like for the imams, unfortunately, that are from back home, I mean, don't get me wrong, they are a very valuable asset to the community, right? Because the wisdom that they bring, especially from seeing Islamic environments from their studies and whatnot, it's unparalleled. And it's so important for the youngsters to see that as well,
mhm,
right?
yeah,
But but at the same time, I really feel for the difficulties and the challenges they go through by getting gigs in America and then being stuck at the mercy and of the boards. And unfortunately, it's very few cases where I've actually seen it turn out to be good.
yeah. No, that's true. There's a brother Adnan. He's like, the younger generation need to step it up. It's time for the elders to leave their beloved seats and their mentalities. Inshallah,
You
we
gotta
all
agree
come.
with him. I
Yeah,
You gotta agree with him because like until we don't get the involvement from the youngsters, like at the end of the day, right? Like
yeah,
the elders are going to slowly they are passing away, right? That's the
yeah,
reality of life.
yeah.
Now, if
That's
we
true.
haven't involved our youngsters, financially speaking too, and I'm not saying to do it just for the financial aspect of it,
Yeah,
there's a much bigger issue that we are trying to solve. But even if this is what it's going to take, then even the financial aspect of it, donation will stop
yeah,
because you never involved the newer generation. And that's why churches are having a difficult time as well,
yeah,
because the younger
yeah.
generations were never involved, due to which they're having to shut down and whatnot.
Yeah,
Allah
that's
protect.
true. That's true.
Yes,
I mean,
Allah.
you see it all across the board where when we don't involve the young people, uh, as they get older and they become the donor base, and you're not able to, get the money out of them, you're gonna have a hard time running your organizations. So there was a situation one time I met some individuals, and they started talking about their imam, and they're like, yeah, so we don't actually pay our imam. We got him a job at a chicken factory, and he works over there, and he gets paid over there. So alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with a free imam. And the guy was talking about it with pride. And I'm like, do you not realize, if you gave money to this guy to help his family out, his family was overseas. He never had his family here. They never brought his family here. It's like, if you help the guy out, this would be benefiting yourself in this dunya and the hereafter, rather than thinking of it with pride that, oh yeah, we got him a job at the chicken factory, and he doesn't even have a car. He just walks there.
Subhanallah. I mean, these guys, like the ones from overseas, they really like you want to see sacrifice.
Yeah,
These guys make the sacrifice, like they really do, and that's like Allah accept their sacrifices, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward them immensely for their efforts that they have made, and may Allah grant them the khair of this world and the hereafter, because my heart goes out to them, it really does.
yeah, and that's the reason we're hufaz, we have ulama, is because of these guys and the sacrifices they made. That although they couldn't speak English, and a lot of times they would go to the grocery store and they wouldn't know how to figure out things, and they still made the sacrifice to be here for us. And it's just, really, and it just goes to show you the sacrifices and the struggles they went through just to make us who we are. The world is worried about everyone's mental health, but the abuse imams go through, no one ever asks. Imam Sab, how are you? Imam Sab, how is your health? Imam Sab, how is your family? How is your situation at home? And not getting personal, but like, how is your situation at home? Meaning, like, how are your wife and kids? Um, Imams don't have an outlet to take, care of their feelings, or to ask, what are our needs. And I was actually having a conversation with an imam a few weeks ago, and I asked him, I was like, how are you doing? He's like, nobody ever calls and asks me how I'm doing. Everybody always wants to talk about the problems they're having at home, the problems they're having with their kids who aren't listening to them. They're not making enough money, things like that. He's like, the other day a kid asked me at school, he teaches at school, he's like, one of the kids asked me, he's like, Imam Sahab, how are you doing? And he's like, that was the first kid who ever asked me. And he's like, it felt good. And when I called him and we spoke, he's like, it feels good when people ask. And we sort of had a little bit, as we call it in Urdu, bharas, like we took out each other's, frustrations and feelings. He's like, Imams need to have more of this where they can actually vent out and even put their feelings out there. He's like, and everybody thinks we shouldn't have that.
And you know what? Because I mean, a lot of times imams are the ones that we go to our problems for, right? Like we go to the imams to vent out the problems. Even now, sometimes like when my students speak to me and I hear, and even aside from my students, when someone calls me and tells me like a very crazy situation, it takes a toll on the imams as well, right? Even when I was in IFTA in South Africa with Mufti Ibrahim Desai, rahmatullahi alayhi, and we would do these these sessions actually of nikah, and like us looking at the scenarios of divorce and things like that. When cases would be brought to the Dar al Ifta, right, we would hear the whole story, and some of the stories were really like, it was crazy on the things that took place, and it takes a very big mental toll on an individual to hear that. How can someone treat another person like this? And it takes a very big toll, and that's why like imams, they're usually the ones that we go to and we speak to them about these things. We pour it all out on them, right? But at the end of the day, they need to go to someone to have this. And alhamdulillah, I'm very fortunate that, especially for the young ulama, the young imams, that they have teachers here that they can go back to. Alhamdulillah, I have my teachers here in Atlanta as well as in Canada, so it really helps enable and being able to sometimes like, there are cases or situations where we don't have the answer to, right? Or we don't have the wisdom to answer those. So it's important. And again, this goes back to the other point that I was saying of having those imported imam is also essential, because we can go back to them for their wisdom and see what situations or what scenarios we may not have even thought about in answering these questions or solving issues.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. That's awesome. So one of the things about being an imam is it's a lot of responsibility, because you have to answer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What kind of a toll does that take on a person who is leading the community?
So I think with time, a person, of course, it's a huge
Yeah.
responsibility. A person is now leading the whole community. The whole community's prayers are literally dependent on the imam, right? So if the imam salah is not being accepted, there are the whole community. And I think like imams don't take this lightly.
Mm-hmm.
Imams don't take this lightly. So I remember one time, like, while I was leading salah once, generally I like to stay in the state of wudu, just because you never know when salah time comes. You don't know where you are, and making wudu again is a very challenging task. It comes with its con as well, because you think you always have wudu. So one of my friends has wudu from Fajr all the time. so so I was leading salah. After began the salah, or after we were done, I realized I didn't have wudu for that salah. So I had to tell, now there's two things I could do. I could just stay quiet about it and not do anything. But of course, we know that anyone knows that we are accountable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is a very serious matter. And I'm not about to take the responsibility of anyone's salah on my shoulder. So of course, we have a responsibility to make sure that we tell them and go ahead and everyone repeat the salah. But that's imams don't take this lightly, and they should be appreciated for taking one for the team and literally carrying the salah of the whole community on their shoulders.
Maulana Noman Sab is talking about some of my younger cousins. Some Hazrat have wudu from Tahajjud. um, Mufti Muhammad Sab, he has a very good point. How many youngsters' opinions are taken in Mashwara?
Well, we got to bring the youngsters first.
We gotta bring the youngsters first. But in making community decisions and helping the imam formulate a better idea, how important is that?
No, I mean, imagine when a masjid is in its building stages and you have the youth committee in that meeting.
Hmm.
Envision that community for a second. Like, how far will they go?
Hmm.
Because they're literally taking the youth issues and we are now telling them, you tell us what you need, right? Because right now
Yeah,
it's all what we think they need. But let's ask them. I mean, I'm a youth too, so you can ask me what we need in the masajid, and we can get to the bottom of that. But it's important to have every aspect of the community covered because that's what a masjid is, right?
yeah,
The men, the women, the children, making sure all the needs for each individual, the families is taken care of. And of course, that's what makes a community. It's not just the men that go to the masjid. No, it's
yeah,
much more now, right?
yeah. So what's it called? There's the brothers saying, "I see some gray hairs on you." Um,
Who? It might be the light. I don't know what the brother
so
is talking
so
about.
I remember I've also been a board member of a masjid, and I obviously having served as imam, I was volunteer imam. I didn't get paid for this for the years. And one of the
You
things,
got paid in the akhirah,
inshallah.
inshallah.
But what I'm gonna put it out there is, being a volunteer imam, the thing that sucks is you get the same amount of abuse as anybody else because it doesn't matter whether you're getting paid or not. So
So
what's it called?
before the other imams get peanuts, you didn't even get that.
Yeah, I didn't even get the peanuts. What's it called? Sometimes if you're on the plane and people get peanuts and you don't because you were sleeping, you still get jealous. That's what it is. But what's it called? So I came from that perspective, and one of the things, one time we were having a meeting and they were wanting to do a picnic, and I was like, I'm not gonna give you guys any money because you guys don't do any kids programs, and you guys don't ever approve them for me to do the kids programs. And I was like, I'm not gonna do the money. I'm not gonna give you guys the check for your program until you allow me to do a kids program. And that was the only way I was able to get the money. So sometimes you do have to play politics and stuff like that. But I mean,
But
it is what
why?
it
Why
is.
do we need to play politics to
What
help the community?
what can you do? And even as far as one time we were having a discussion, and I'm not going to take the guy's name, so we brought in a guy to help us out, and everybody knows who he is. I think whoever's watching or listening right now, um, in Ramadan to help out, and we were having a discussion on his salary, for Ramadan only, and two of the guys were like, "Well, we should pay him like such and such amount," and it was such a low amount, and I was like, "That's insulting," and they're like, "Why?" I'm like, You're bringing this guy on to be your full time imam for the whole month of Ramadan, putting all the responsibility on him for the five prayers, giving Jum'ah, giving nightly khatiras, and leading the first 8 rakats of Tarawih, and giving dars after 4 rakats on the weekends, and you guys are wanting to pay him so less. I'm like, I'm gonna suggest this amount, and I don't think this is even enough. And they're like, oh, that's too much. I'm like, no, why? I was like, he's giving you all of this knowledge and information. How is that too much? And then we agreed to a middle amount, which even then I was like, I was like, I don't think this is enough. But
And that
it is
kind
what
of,
it is.
I'd like to highlight another point here as well, right? Because not every community is set, not
Yeah,
every community is developed in terms of like their finances and whatnot, right?
yeah,
And I get that, right?
yeah,
But you should make your responsibilities accordingly, right? If you can't afford a full-time, full-fledged imam who is very well qualified, so be it. Don't put the responsibilities of a full-fledged imam because that's the decision you have to deal with. That can you really afford this individual or not? But don't put them in a difficult situation where you're going to demand a full-time imam responsibilities, but pay him less than part-time imam salary.
yeah. So Maulana Noman has a question. There's a crisis at play right now. Less and less ulama want to be in the imam space because of the politics and red tape involved. How do we try and resolve that? I don't know if we discussed it earlier,
Yeah,
but
we did a little touch up on it, and again,
yeah.
like as I said, and he knows this, right? He is an imam as well, right? But
Let's hope his
mashallah,
board members aren't watching.
he's a very well qualified imam, mashallah,
Alhamdulillah.
and does a
He's
excellent job in his community.
a
May Allah
great
tabarak wa ta'ala
podcast guest as
preserve him.
well.
Yeah, he's a very good imam, mashallah, very good friend as well, and he has a lot of great insights. So, as we mentioned before, like these are competent ulama, mashallah, Like these are the people that the youth want to be with, hang out with, chill out with, right? They don't want to chill out with the 55-year-old Imam unless he's very cool, which is going to be hard to come by, right? They want to chill with the young Imam who looks like them, who can relate to them, and who can do these activities with them. But until and unless we don't allow them to come into the masjid space and allow them to take on some responsibilities, and the thing is, sometimes we don't give responsibilities to the youngsters. And sometimes that's how they learn. They need to be given that responsibility. And if they're not given that responsibility, then they feel like, I'm maybe they don't want me here. And that's why I feel that's how we're going to get the youth back, have their voice heard. If their voices aren't heard, they have no need to come there.
And this has become the youth segment of the podcast. But no, obviously it's going to come back to the fact that there is a segment that is really missing from the masjid, and if they don't get involved or get an opportunity to get involved, we're essentially, building a beautiful house, but from the bottom it's made out of wood. Like everything at the top is made out of bricks, and it's eventually going to collapse.
Yeah.
And that's the realistic situation that we're in right
And
now.
with the young ulama and young imams that are out there, they can do literally anything, but as long as they are spending the time with the youth really appreciate that. They really appreciate that. And like alhamdulillah, my brother Mufti Muhammad and I, we took some of our students out camping, right? It was extremely cold. Like this was right at winter break. It was extremely cold. It was the absolute coldest time we've ever been camping. Our hands were frozen, even though we were sitting in front of the fire. The heaters were as good as not being there. But it was really like crazy situation, severe, intense situation, right? But they absolutely had the time of their life, right? That's all they need. They want to be around us, right? Because we relate to them. We can have a conversation with them without telling them you're going to hell,
Yeah.
right? And that's not how the Prophet ﷺ was either, right? So, and that's important. And sometimes when with the elderly, of course, they now don't have that tolerance that they may had before, right? So it's important to keep that in mind. And may Allah protect all of our imams. And really, and it's very saddening, as the imam mentioned, how the younger ulama don't want to come into these spaces
Yeah.
because, and that's a problem. That's a huge problem, because if this job or responsibility is not appealing, no one will come to that.
Yeah.
And uh a good way to see it is these board members. Would they, with the conditions that they have put in their contracts and the responsibilities, would they want their own children to take that position?
Exactly. Exactly. So
Yeah,
like,
it hits them on a nerve. It's a
yeah.
very sensitive nerve, but it hits.
Well, it goes back to, I'll give you an example. It goes back to a lot of times when politicians are ready to go to war and people ask them, "Are you ready to send your own kid to war?" And they're like, "No, I'd never do that." It's like, oh, okay, well, how can you do it to other people's kids? Similar, like one time when we were having a program and your brother was coming that evening, I actually got smacked that morning by somebody who was upset about something. And I was the one who led Fajr right after Fajr. I got smacked across the face. What's it called? And you know, people still hear that and find out about it. They're like, "Oh, really? Somebody would do that?" I was like, yeah, people are reckless. My dad, who used to lead voluntarily back in 97, him and my grandfather, rahmatullah alayh, they were praying and somebody stabbed my father and my grandfather as they were praying, a Muslim person. He was like, why does he lead, why don't I lead? And that was, and he had other issues as well, but he stabbed my father. So people do take things to an extreme, and being an imam comes with a lot of responsibilities, and people just don't realize that. And the brother made a good point. Inshallah, we're going to close off with this one. Masajid need to be open to leadership workshops, dawah workshops, academic assistance, community events, just for the youth. And I would agree with that. And if you want to shed any light before we close up
No, I
on that.
think that's of course that's not the point of the masjid, but of
Yeah.
course it is a very appealing thing for them to get them to the masjid.
Yeah.
And once they are in our space, it's a lot easier to work on them in terms of building character and Islamic morals, and that's, I think, very much needed. And yes, masajid should work towards that direction in terms of providing a space for them in
Yeah.
which they can just come have fun, right? And at the same time, live up to their Muslim identity.
Yeah, yeah. So what's it called? There's somebody asking. I just tuned in. Will this be available afterwards? Yes, inshallah, it'll be available afterwards. And brother Adnan said, "Mashallah for that point." The podcast is available on the YouTube channel. It's available on Facebook video wise, and it's available on all major platforms for audio as well. So before we close up, like you were talking about, doing leadership and different things like this, having programs. One of our great ulama who passed away last year, Sheikh Sayyid Ahmad Palanpuri rahmatullah alayh, when he walked into our masjid when he came a few years back, one of the first things he asked is like, where are the African American brothers, where are the convert brothers, and different things like that. And he used to make an emphasis on providing services for our women and our children as well. And he, living in India, where the society and the community is much different, when he would come to America, he understood the needs of the American community. That's why he emphasized, even programs for women and children inside of the masajid. He's like, where else are they going to get Islamic mahal? Obviously, taking care of proper parda and things like that. But he's like, where else are they going to get an Islamic environment? So, if we're not paying attention to these things and equipping our imams, our ulama, and our female alimas to take care of programs in the appropriate spaces, we're failing our own communities. So any parting advice for us, Mufti Sab?
Again, just going back, we need involvement. The community, the next generation needs involvement from the youth. If the youth are not involved, it's a very dark future that is to come on upon our masajid. May Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala protect our masajid and allow our youth to really have a voice and be able to contribute towards the masajid. And at the same time, I think it's important for each and every one of us that is listening or that will listen, that we do our part in giving the masjid or the masajid the support they need, not just by donating, but also giving our time and seeing on how we can set up a program with the guidance of our imams and ulama.
Jazakallah khair. Beautiful advice. So, inshallah, if you've listened to this or watched this and you got some benefit out of this, remember to remind other people to also watch this episode. This is a very important episode because it deals very closely with our community development and with the future of our ummah. Because if we don't pay attention to these important points brought up by Mufti Saab, we are setting ourselves up for failure. Jazakallah khair, Mufti Saab. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you, your family, and your father, rahmatullah alayh.
I mean, Jazakumullah khair and Jazakallah khair for having me on.
No problem. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.